Welcome to the 3030 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Dr. Ruiz.
Hello everyone, my guest today is David Korsunsky. Dave is the founder of Heads Up Health, a website dedicated to empowering individuals to take control of their health by using data to guide their progress. Dave received his bachelor's in mathematics from the University of Winnipeg and his MBA from Northeastern University in Boston. He built his career in tech at VMware in Palo Alto, California, where he managed global technology partnerships and was recognized as one of the top leaders across the 20,000 plus person company. During his time at VMware, Dave led projects to drive virtualization and cloud computing adoption into healthcare. He has used this knowledge to create a new app to help you guide your progress in health without having to guess. If you enjoyed the show, please share with your family and friends. And don't forget to visit paleofx.com. Another set of tickets has been released and I would love to see you there. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hello everyone, super excited for my next guest, David Korsunsky. I was introduced to him by Dr. Grace Liu, and I want to share his knowledge with you guys. David, how are you doing today?
Doing wonderful. Guillermo, thanks for having me on. We have a great mutual friend that was kind enough to connect, and we're going to nerd out and pick each other's brains and talk about some really cool stuff. So I'm happy to be here.
So, I was talking to Ben Lynch, Dr. Ben Lynch, and I told him, when I prepare for the podcast, I say, there's a lot of people that are just joining us in this ancestral paleo health movement, and I've been at it since like 2008. So I'm trying to bring them up to speed, So I told him, basically my podcast, I just ask stupid questions so people don't have to. And so he said, you got to make that your tagline. So 3030 Health, asking stupid questions so you don't have to.
Let's do it. I'll throw some stupid ones right back at you.
So, David, before we begin, what is your hero story?
My story? Well, I spent most of the last 10 years working in an extremely stressful work environment here in the Silicon Valley area in California. It was an incredible experience, but I reached a point career-wise where I was starting to experience physical effects of stress. And that's a big thing because it moves from just being something that's mental to where you're experiencing physical symptoms, very unpleasant types of experiences. And so I set off down the path of trying to troubleshoot the problem, like everyone. And what I realized was that it was very difficult to get access to my medical history simply because I'd gone to grad school in Boston and changed doctors a few times. And so I had to cobble together my medical history. And I was also collecting a lot of data at home, like anybody is who's making this transition. They're learning how to change their nutrition, moving towards more of a high protein, high fat diet away from carbs. I'd never even counted calories before. So I had to go through a complete lifestyle transformation, and I very carefully tracked everything in a spreadsheet, like many people do. But I was able to share that spreadsheet with a functional doctor in Austin, Texas. And we'd get on Skype, just like you and I are on Skype. I'd pull up the spreadsheet, we'd review my test results, we'd design a 3-month protocol, and we'd repeat the process. And that got me, as an uneducated patient, engaged in these numbers, which I would have paid otherwise no attention to. Most people go get the blood draw, the doctor tells them if something's out of range, and the individual goes home without actually taking ownership of those numbers and studying them for themselves. And I had such a great outcome from using the data and working with a functional doc that I decided to build an app that anybody could use to manage this data. Because, as you know, Guillermo, at the end of the day, it's just a numbers game. We're measuring things and we're trying to improve on numbers. It could be a marker of disease. It could be something related to body composition. So that's how I got here. I reversed my own, what was called maladaptive stress, and it turned into something I became very passionate about. And we've been working on it for 3 years. We've got about 10,000 people on the system, and I'm just following my dream right now.
It's funny that you mentioned data, and how medicine is a numbers game. For example, if you're diagnosed with cancer, you go into the rubric and try to figure out what are the odds of going into this chemotherapy agent and the outcomes. So it's basically a numbers game. It's driven by results on a paper. Okay, and I love objective data. There's a lot of practitioners that are very subjective. They can infer things from spiritually, or or in different ways. I am not that in touch with my subjective side of myself. In subjective data is very important. How do you feel? How do you perform? But I rely on objective data and the optimization of these numbers in order to have solid data for my patients, in order for them to get better. I rely on objectivity and how those numbers are changing, and that protects me from, like, for example, if I'm having a bad day, if I got stuck in the traffic, and if I got cut off, and my subjective is not on point, my care is going to be consistent because I move my ones and zeros.
That's right, yeah. Well, we are like-minded in that respect.
So, describe this app to my listeners. What do you do with it? How can you get value out of it?
The best way to think about it is using an analogy of how people manage their bank accounts. And it's very typical for us to have more than one bank account, very common for us to have more than one credit card. So in consumer finance, there are some wonderful products out there, like Mint.com, Personal Capital, QuickBooks, etc. And you can create an account and link up all of your bank accounts. And it will automatically download all of the transaction history from all of those banks and put it into one place where you can manage everything. You can see all of your spending on a certain category, for example, restaurants, even though you're looking at data from 5 different credit card and bank statements. That does not exist in healthcare, as you know, Guillermo. Every time you go to a different doctor, they have a different set of your medical history. So it all becomes very fragmented. So what we're doing is applying that same concept in consumer finance to personal health. And you can sign in and search the database and say, Guillermo, which doctors or medical providers have you visited in your history? And you just search, and let's say you click on, you're out in Tempe, so maybe it's the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, for example, or Banner, or one of the other Arizona-based clinics, for instance. All we need is your patient portal credentials, the same login you'd use to go into the doctor's office, and we'll pull all of those records out for you instantly. And so you can pull down all of that data. I'm sure it's common for you to have patients who bring you their clinical history from when they were in the conventional system. Hey, I've got all this data. Here's a bunch of PDFs and paper records for you to parse through. So we pull all of that information out. And then people are starting to collect a lot of very valuable data at home. That's what's happening with technology and with digital health. Things like the Oura Ring that can do 24/7 activity and HRV and body temperature. Everyone's carrying a smartphone that can track things like sleep and activity. We have a lot of people starting to carefully track their blood sugar, their macronutrients, especially if they're on, for example, low carbohydrate or other nutritional therapies. So all of that data goes in as well. And it really just becomes like your own personal dashboard, because everyone's body is different. Everyone is coming from a different place in terms of genetics and upbringing and your own personal level of insulin resistance, insulin sensitivity. So everyone has to customize their own approach. And that's where we give the objective data to the individual to say, okay, I'm going to try 50 grams of carbs per day and track my weight and my blood sugar and my hemoglobin A1C. Okay, I did that for a month. Now I'm going to take it down to 25 grams, or now I'm going to try a different thyroid protocol, for example, and retest my thyroid. So it's just a way to give people access to all the numbers they need so they can personalize their own approach. That's essentially all it is.
That's amazing, having all that information in one receptacle and being able to look at the big picture. It's just so important because, for example, tracking your lipids, and you are seeing, I went paleo, and I can see 2 years ago my cholesterol was 180, and now I'm paleo, and now I'm at 208. And you start becoming alarmed. But if you don't see that yeah, so now it's 208, but your HDL cholesterol has gone up to 80. In HDL being protective, now you're like, oh crap, sure, my cholesterol is higher, but my HDL is protecting me from this increase in HDL. Or the other way around, you can see a decrease on your HDL and your lipids are getting better, okay, because you're taking a statin, but now you see that your HDL used to be in the 70s and now it's in the 30s. So now you're like, oh, maybe this is not serving me.
That's exactly right. That aligns very well with my own personal experience where I ran all of my blood work before I started a paleo diet, and then I went paleo for 6 months and then retested. And both of those data sets came from different labs. So my conventional doctor didn't have access to any of that information. I just did it through WellnessFX, where I just bought the test myself, which a lot of people are doing. And it was exactly like you described. My total cholesterol went up, and there are a lot of doctors out there who will only look at cholesterol and LDL as part of a diagnosis. And like you said, prescribe based on that. But if the patient is tracking this information and they can look at everything and say, okay, well, hold on a second here. HDL went up, my HSCRP went down, my other markers of inflammation went down, my body composition got better. So that's where we want to give people the information to start making their own decisions about how they choose care. And if you give people the right data, the decisions become much easier. So I think that's a perfect example, is lipids and how they may go up, but there's a ton of other markers that improve. I'm sleeping better, my inflammation's lower, I've lost 10 pounds. Am I really worried that total and LDL went up? And there are other examples, but that's exactly right. And if you give people a way to track this themselves, it actually gets people engaged in these numbers. And only the individual can correlate their lifestyle choice with what the numbers mean. The doctor only has the numbers when the needle went in the arm and the blood came out. They don't know what you've been eating, drinking, sleeping, etc. between visits. Only you can take that knowledge of how you've been living your lifestyle, match it up to the lab tests, and then really determine for yourself what's the best direction.
And that's very important also for practitioners, having the trending data, because, for example, let's say you were doing a standard American diet and your cholesterol levels were 180 again, and your HDL was low and everything was low. And then you start doing paleo ancestral keto diet, and now, the 6 months go by, you get that needle on your antecubital vein, and now your total cholesterol is 289, and your HDL is like 70, and your LDL is not favorable. And you're like, well, it's okay because I'm eating more fat and, and whatever. So sometimes we like to excuse our biases.
Totally.
Getting these findings might indicate that, yeah, you're following a paleo ancestral diet, but maybe you need to make a couple of modifications because you might be ApoE positive and you are holding on to too many saturated fats. That does not mean that you need to go back to a SAD diet, but that means that you could improve on your current diet to make it even better for yourself. So maybe modifying your diet and not eating as much coconut oil and including more olive and avocado oil. And then all of a sudden, your lipids go back to the 200 levels, but your HDL is going up and your LDL goes down.
Yes, agree 100%. And that's where it becomes important to give people the data so that they can do exactly what you described. You test one intervention, the lipids go up. You make a new discovery. Okay, I'm ApoE positive. I'm going to shift some of the concentrations of the fats. I'm going to retest the numbers. And you can just see it for yourself. And it's all just a process that we go through to continually try to optimize. And so if we can facilitate giving people the numbers to track it themselves, and then ideally share it with an expert like yourself when we have questions, that's what I believe can be a very powerful tool.
So what are some of the, the interventions that have caused the biggest needle moving in your own personal health?
Wow, that's a great question here. I think the first major intervention was just getting off the standard American diet and getting onto a paleo diet. That actually was not as easy as I thought because I found myself in the grocery store not really knowing what to buy. And I kind of got overwhelmed the first few times I went to the grocery store because I had to relearn basically how to shop and how to buy food. So I quantified that 6 month experiment and I went very strict paleo for 6 months, did a DEXA scan before and after, and did a full set of labs before and after. And I had a great outcome. Dropped 10 pounds, the lipids got better, the blood sugar numbers got better, but then I started to plateau. So then I decided as my next experiment, I was going to try to go onto a low carb ketogenic diet. So I tried that for about a year. Equally challenging, but in different ways. So pushed pretty hard on that for about a year. And actually, one of the most powerful things I've learned in the whole process, probably the most powerful, is just how to check my blood sugar levels. Now, if I could just drop everything else, and that's the only tool I had at my disposal, learning how to check my blood sugar 1 and 2 and 3 hours after I eat a meal and make sure that that meal is not sending my blood sugar through the roof. That is the most effective tool, in my opinion, for weight loss. Ditch the scale, just get a glucometer. And so that was extremely important. I check my fasting blood sugar every morning when I wake up, as soon as I wake up. And I can basically tell based on that morning number what my diet was the day before and what my exercise was the day before. And if I kept my carbs in check and got some good exercise, I know I'm going to be right around 85. And so I'd say if there's one thing I've learned in all of this is the importance of blood sugar regulation. And I test everything. I've tested heart rate variability, and I've got a ring that can do sleep tracking. I've run tons of labs on myself. I've tested all kinds of really nerdy stuff. But honestly, if I had to boil it down at the end of the day, I would say that just getting a glucometer and using that to guide your progress, for me personally, that's been the most important thing I've learned on the journey.
So, you're familiar with the big study where they tested blood sugar and microbiota and how some people reacted to cookies and some people reacted to bananas. What are some things that surprised you that affect your fasting blood glucose or your glucose that you would have never thought that were maybe not harmful but not the best for you?
I can't really say that I've had any real major surprises in the numbers. I can test my blood sugar after pretty much any meal, and I can't say that I've had any shockers. What I do mostly is, especially when I'm traveling, and I know I won't have access to my food at home, I'll test certain restaurant meals. So I went to the Bulletproof Conference down in Pasadena. This was a few months ago, and when I'm traveling, I'll often go to In-N-Out Burger and just get the lettuce wrap cheeseburger. And so it's kind of just quick. I'm on the road. I don't have access to my own stuff. So I'll actually test my blood sugar before I eat that meal, and then 1, 2, and 3 hours after I eat the meal. Sometimes I'll even do the 30-minute postprandial reading because a lot of the times the big spike happens right at even before the 1 hour mark. So I'll just do that. And if I have a favorable blood sugar curve, which means it goes up after the meal, it's below 120 and then starts to come down normally, that's what I'm looking for when it comes to food. With other people, I know that stress can also play a big factor in blood sugar. So I think if people are experiencing a lot of anxiety or stress, they may want to test. And that may be a time to introduce different interventions like meditation or yoga or other things like flotation tank or other things that induce the parasympathetic and look at blood sugar as a result of that. I know that poor sleep quality can affect blood sugar as well. So there are some studies that showed if you put people on, I think it was 4 hours, 4 hours of sleep per night, within a week they have symptoms representative of a type 2 diabetic in terms of blood sugar, just from poor sleep. So getting a good night's sleep, I think, also has been interesting to correlate. So those are different things that I would look at as I'm testing my own blood sugar, or if someone was asking me what to optimize. Those things all play a role. So does body composition, your lean mass versus fat mass. That, I think, can also play a role. So there's different ways to come at it, but those are the things that come up for me.
Okay, so two questions from that. Okay, question number one: can you explain to our listeners how do you test, the postprandial, what curve you're looking for, in the morning, and then where would you start? Because I've heard people start with like fasting and then like 100 grams of white rice or 100 grams of sweet potatoes, and then to create a baseline. And then second, and you might want to answer this one first. What do you order when you go to In-N-Out? And then I'll tell you what I order when I go to In-N-Out.
I do 2 cheeseburgers with lettuce wrap. That's it.
That's it.
Yep. Now, I also wanted to do the blood sugar testing with 2 double cheeseburgers, and so that one pushed it a little bit high for me. So I just dialed it back. So my go-to on the road In-N-Out meal is they call it protein style, which just means it's lettuce wrap. And so that's what I get. I get 2 of those. How about you? What's your go-to?
I do a 4x0, so 4 meats, no cheese, no spread, both types of onions. And if I'm feeling frisky, I have to confess, I do get some fries.
They're good there, so I can't fault you for that.
Yeah, in the way I see it, they're not frying any wheat, they're not frying any onion rings, and I don't do it very often. But I found, that maybe my blood glucose doesn't spike, but I get a little bit of like acne if I haven't distinguished if it's the spread or if it's the cheese. So I know that it's not serving me, and the 4x0 is pretty damn tasty. So
All right, 4x0. I like it. I think that's something I'm going to have to test out. I'd never heard of that before.
pro tip, you can have those green peppers. They can chop them up and grill them for you, but they might be a little bit too hot, and then they can give you a little bit of like pain in your stomach. So
Well, hey, I'm of the opinion that we should still enjoy the finer things in life, and the occasional indulgence with some French fries once in a while. I think that's healthy. Everyone has their own perspectives on that, but I still enjoy the occasional indulgences once in a while as well.
totally, we gotta live life, man.
Amen. Sometimes we take this stuff too seriously and we drive ourselves nuts. So I definitely try to enjoy the finer things. I'd say I'm probably 95%, and occasionally I'll indulge. But getting back to your other question, Guillermo, we'll go to Walmart, go online, buy a glucometer. Okay. I use the Keto Mojo device. It's awesome because you can also test ketones if you want to go that route. But you can just get a glucometer, whatever, $20, $50. I was using the Bayer Contour for years. Just get one. And then just start testing your blood sugar in the morning. This is how I would approach it personally. What do you got? Which model are you using?
I'm using the Contour.
Yeah, I used that one for years. It was rock solid. So I would just start testing in the morning when you wake up. And what you'll start seeing is that if you exercise more on a previous certain day, or if you restrict carbohydrates, for example, on a certain day, you'll start to see, oh, my fasting blood sugar is lower the following day. So you start to realize how much control you have over that first number, the fasting glucose. If I go do some high intensity exercise and eat a low carbohydrate diet, the next day my blood sugar is going to come down. And then if I change my diet and have some wine or have some whatever, high carb foods, it'll go back to its baseline. For me, my baseline fully topped off is 95. So just start testing that in the morning and you'll start to see how different lifestyle changes affect that number. And you'll start to see that you can actually have a great degree of control over that number just through diet and lifestyle. No drugs. That's the first thing I would look at. And then I would just start testing your favorite foods. Take the blood sugar reading before you eat. Let's say I'm going for lunch and I'm going to do the In-N-Out. I'll test my blood sugar before I eat, and then I'll test it 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours later. Just keep those numbers slow and low. It's like you're cooking a good steak. You just want it nice and slow and low. Avoid the ones that are just going to send it through the roof. So we have a feature in Heads Up Health called the carb tolerance test, where you can just enter in the food that you ate. Let's say it's 100 grams of sweet potato, or it's Denny's bacon and eggs, whatever it is. Just put it in, test your pre-meal, your 1 hour, your 2 hour, and your 3 hour. You can test pizza, you can test whatever you want, just test it. And a lot of people are testing their favorite foods that they thought were metabolically safe. And at the 3 hour mark, the blood sugar is still skyrocketing like a rocket ship. That's probably something you need to avoid. I did this with a family member, and we went for breakfast in Scottsdale, not far from you. And we went to our favorite breakfast spot, and she ordered the lemon ricotta pancakes or something like that. Just kind of her go-to indulgent Saturday breakfast. And then we did the test, and the blood sugar readings were just astronomical. But you don't feel that. It's not like you necessarily would even know that that's happening unless you test it. So she didn't know. And that was incredibly insightful. And then she could say, okay, I probably should not choose this particular food. Another woman did it and tested 2 slices of pizza. And again, at the 3 hour mark, it was still climbing. Normally, your blood sugar should start to spike up. That's a normal response after you eat a food. And then at the 2 hour and 3 hour mark, it will start to trend back down, closer to where it was before meal. So just learning how to control those numbers and the fasting glucose, I think that's the most effective tool for weight loss. I think it's the most effective tool for preventing metabolic related conditions, controlling metabolic conditions. So that's how I would approach it. I'd love your thoughts, Guillermo, on how you counsel people.
For me personally, one of the things that spikes my glucose, it's pretty sharp spike and not as easy as a return, is white rice. It's still not, it doesn't, my blood glucose doesn't go above 120, but it takes a little bit longer, closer to the 3 hours to go back to baseline.
Got it. Yeah, that's great data to have.
Yeah. Sure. So I still eat it, but I'm not, it's not a staple carbohydrate for my diet. Sweet potatoes, on the other hand, perfect curve.
Beautiful.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect curve. And it's funny because I'm a big fan of rice. It's very hypoallergenic. But if I have it too many days in a row, I can see, I get a little bit constipated, and I can see the scale move in the wrong direction. So, minimizing the amount of rice and and if I include carbs, I get more like a starchy tuber. It has helped me, it helps me control my weight. It helps me control my appetite. It helps me, just be a better human being. Additionally, a lot of people that I talk to, they, you start doing the paleo thing, you start doing the ancestral thing, and you see, the weight drop, and you see all these awesome things happen, and then you kind of plateau, okay? And what I've been noticing is that there's like this honeymoon period where you don't know what to do. So you're just eating like meat and veggies. You second guess yourself every time you go to the store, and you're like, oh, is this paleo?
That's the hardest part. Yeah, it takes a long time. You got to relearn.
So then, after like 3 months, and then you have a little bit of knowledge under your belt, then you start like opening the can of worms that is like paleo brownies and paleo pizza.
Don't do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it is more anti-inflammatory than eating a gluten bomb.
For sure.
But it's a processed food. There's nothing paleo about brownies.
I agree with you. Yeah, I try to stay away from the processed stuff, even if it's paleo or local or whatever it is. I just stick to whole foods.
Yeah, and a very awesome example, okay, that I give my patients is what has a higher glycemic index, French fries or boiled potatoes. Boiled potatoes have a higher glycemic index than French fries because you're frying those fries in fat, and that slows down the absorption of carbohydrates into your bloodstream. Okay? So I'm going to ask you, what has a higher glycemic index? Gluten-free bread or Ezekiel 100% gluten-containing bread?
Gluten-free bread or
your regular, wheat whole grain bread.
I mean, if it's white bread, I don't think that I'd have to say that's going to be the greater offender there.
Correct. And what happens is that when we make gluten-free bread, we are literally stripping a protein from the bread. And protein slows down the absorption of carbohydrates. So to think that you're going to eat a gluten-free diet in order to lose weight is kind of insane, because what you're doing is you're eliminating a protein source that is very inflammatory. So don't take that away from this whole thing. But going into a gluten-free diet, it's a two-parter. You have to eliminate that inflammatory protein and avoid things that are gluten-free unnaturally, because they tend to have a higher glycemic index, and that's going to make you gain weight because it's going to impact your blood sugar faster.
Yeah, there's just as much crappy gluten-free products out there as there are with gluten. It's just they're replacing one thing with another, but they're still highly processed. They still may be high in other preservatives and other substitutes that don't necessarily make them any healthier. So I agree with you. Choosing the foods that are naturally gluten-free is the best way to do it.
And then you get into the argument of, okay, so I'm not eating, cream of wheat in the morning, okay? But I found this amazing recipe for quinoa oats or whatever, And then in the idea behind eliminating wheat is that that protein is very inflammatory, and it's kind of like the way that the plant has adapted to defend itself, because a plant can't get up and go to the doctor or run away from a predator. So it's creating all of these inflammatory proteins in order to help defend the plant itself, so that, if you get a tummy ache, you're like, yeah, I'm not going to eat that because it gives me a tummy ache. Okay, so quinoa is it's not completely without its inflammatory properties. And quinoa has something called saponins, and saponins act like little soap that like a detergent that breaks down the fatty layer in the cell membrane to create holes in your intestines. So, not saying that everyone is going to have the same reaction to the saponins in quinoa as the gluten in wheat, but understanding that all of these grains have developed evolutionary mechanisms to affect you in a deleterious way in order to prevent you from eating them.
Yeah, I was just at a talk by Georgia Eads, who was speaking on the same topic, which is these natural defense mechanisms that are present, also in certain plants and fruits. So yeah, those can have an effect, and everyone's going to have a different level of sensitivity. That's where I think the N=1 part of this comes in, and starting to figure out what things work for you and what things don't. And it might be the things that you thought were actually really good for you are not. And that's where I think it's up to each of us to do our own testing, collect some data, work with professionals like yourself, and it really has to be optimized to the individual.
Even things that we believe to be really good for us, like, for example, milk thistle extract, it's really good for your liver in a hormetic effect. It actually creates a little bit of damage to your liver, and then your liver regenerates and overcomes that damage, and it becomes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But if you're having, Tylenol toxicity, which kind of depletes the glutathione in your liver, and then you put a toxin, as in milk thistle, although it's a very low inflammation that your body can repair from. If you are super stressed and your glutathione in your liver is super stressed, the last thing you want to do is put in this oxidative stress. It's like, for example, if you had rhabdomyolysis, you wouldn't want to go exercise because exercise is a low-level stressor that you get better from. And being able to modulate all of these stressors and pointing out what is the most beneficial interventions for yourself is what's going to be the most beneficial thing for you.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where testing becomes important. And I know I'm working with a functional medicine doctor right now who's helping me with similar types of things, just issues related to malabsorption in the gut. And sometimes you have to go beyond the conventional lab testing to start to figure out where to go. So a typical physical exam might look at a CBC and some lipids and some liver and kidney tests, but there are also other tests that need to be run sometimes to find these things out. Food sensitivities, IgG. It could be, for example, looking at gluten sensitivities. It could be stool testing. It could be organic acid testing. These are tests that health professionals outside of the conventional systems will commonly look at to start to find those things that are specific to the individual. It could be infections in the GI tract. That was something I had to work on. Could be subclinical thyroid numbers. So again, it's trial and error and working with experts like yourself who know how to actually dig a little bit deeper. And Good holistic doctors are always testing, and they're always knocking on different doors, saying, well, let's take a look over here and a look over there. And that's what I respect the most about them, because they find things that you wouldn't find on your own and that you won't find just from a typical checkup.
Just to hammer back at that, it's not that a CBC and a chem panel and a lipid profile is useless. In fact, we have a lot of benefit from getting those numbers, and we should be looking at CBCs and BMPs and all of that. And I think it is a problem within the functional medicine realm that we are very reactionary, and we see these new tests like organic acids test, or and then we think, oh, this is the end all be all. No, we need a complete picture. We need that CBC, we need that chem panel. That CBC will tell you, like, for example, okay, I'm going to give a great example right here. If you have an MTHFR mutation, the MTHFR 667 positive, and you're only utilizing about 70% of the methylfolate, and then you see that your MCV, your mean corpuscular volume, which is a marker of how big your cells, your red blood cells are, okay, it starts getting on the bigger side of the spectrum. That means that you don't have enough either folate or B12 for those cells to divide, because folate and B12 are necessary for the creation of DNA. So if you see that MCV going on, trending towards the higher,
which mine is, by the way, Guillermo, on my most recent labs, and I do believe I have the MTHFR.
Okay, so this is going to be really beneficial for you, So if you're taking folate, okay, so you look at that lab and says, oh, you need folate, and you just prescribe folate, okay? Folate, it's needed for so many different things, okay? Like choline creation, creatine creation, all of these different side pathways that folate is needed for. So you will never outrun a folate deficiency just by adding folate to your diet. On the other hand, that information, knowing that you're MTHFR positive and you have a high MCV, that can lead you to know that, okay, there is a folate or B12 deficiency. We don't know. Okay, so let's test your B12, or let's just do some methyl B12 or some hydrocobalamin on the sublingually, and see if that changes.
So how do you test the B12?
There's two ways of testing for B12. You can do a direct B12 testing. Okay, so you test directly to your B12, but that's not very accurate, because you can have a case where you have a functional deficiency, meaning if you are taking something like cyanocobalamin, which is like the no way of taking B12, that cyanocobalamin has a cyano group that attaches to the receptors of B12, but does not activate them. So it looks like you have B12.
So what's the actual blood test? Is it a B12 blood test you would ask for? What's the name of the actual test?
The methylmalonic acid.
Methylmalonic acid,
which
yes.
is
I've had that one.
Yeah, the MMA, okay, in conjunction with a homocysteine and CRP, and that picture of things,
So those three, those are the three you're looking at. That's a great piece of information. It's just how you look at it. I think it's fascinating. So those three.
So the MCV is going to tell us, okay, so now we have levels of B12. Is the MCV changing? And if it's not changing, then it's likely folate, okay? That you're using too much folate in your MTHFR pathway. So then you can do a couple of things. You can do a little bit of folate to make sure that you have a good level. You can start eating more fresh leafy greens, because once you freeze them, the folate is not very stable and it breaks apart. You're not using it, so it has to be fresh leafy greens. And if that's still not changing the MCV, then you can do other things ahead of the pathway, like taking a little bit of creatine.
So the bodybuilding supplement.
Yeah, just CreaPure, use regular creatine and some choline. And now that folate that you're taking can start, instead of focusing on creating more creatine and creating more choline, now that folate can start getting used to decrease the size of your MCV.
That's so awesome. I love it. It's a detective puzzle here, but you need the numbers.
Yeah, so you need the numbers so you can deduct that you have low methylmalonic acid output by an organic acid test, 100%. Okay, but what is the outcome of that? Is it low methylmalonic acid? Let's give you B12. Without the CBC, you are not going to know if you are moving in the right direction. And a CBC is like $12.
That's where you need all of the pieces together. You need the conventional testing, you need the expertise from someone like yourself, you may need the functional testing, and then knowing the patterns to look for is I think what we're getting at here.
Yeah, and that's the importance of this whole conversation, that it's not just, oh, I see A in your lab test, let's take B. It's like, oh, I see high lipids, let's take a statin. Or I see high MCV, let's take B12. It's the same thing. We complain about allopathic medicine being reactionary and just using a prescription as the only tool. I'm not in the business of just using supplements as my only tool. I want to see objective change with the interventions that I'm doing, because that's what's going to dictate if I'm doing the right thing or not.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think if individuals can see these numbers change for themselves and have someone like you guiding them through the process, and the individual is invested in these numbers, that's, I think, the biggest win, is when you can get people engaged, they can understand it, they can track it, they can say, okay, Guillermo, I understand why you're running these specific tests. I understand what you're looking for, and engage people in the process. I think that is a really powerful way to do things.
Have you got Chris Masterjohn's Testing Nutritional Deficiencies?
No.
Amazing book.
So you've read it already?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, he sent me a copy as soon as it published. It's phenomenal. And it tells you a couple of things. It tells you what to test, what the results mean, and how to fix the deficiencies. Okay, so do you identify yourself as a biohacker?
I don't know. I just want to find out the best ways to improve my health. And that means testing lots of different things. And so you can call that what you want. But for me, I'm fascinated by it. I'm always looking, I'm always digging. I've seen enough disease in my family to know that we have to basically take control ourselves and constantly be our own best detective. So you can call that what you want, but I'm always on the lookout for new things. I'm always measuring. I'm always trying to improve and optimize. And that's just how I live my life. So you can call yourself a detective. You can call yourself a biohacker. You can call yourself someone who's just really proactive about your health. But I think that in this day and age, we have to be, because not everyone has our best interests at heart when it comes to our health.
As your own personal health detective, what are some tests, outside of the blood glucose monitoring, that you would recommend everyone should have done?
Well, there's home tests and then there's lab tests.
Okay, and for lab tests, how do you get direct to consumer labs?
Well, honestly, for your listeners within the United States, we are somewhat different than other countries, because we can just go online to requestatest.com, direct labs. There's tons of websites out there. Wellness FX. We wrote a blog post on like the top 5 direct to consumer labs. And so if your doctor, if they're not working with someone like yourself and you're going to a conventional doctor, maybe you want to run some tests that the doctor won't run because they don't have the billing code to be able to submit it to your insurance, right? This happens. Okay, I want my hemoglobin A1C. Well, you have no symptoms of diabetes. I'm not ordering that for you.
Or worse, they don't know what to do with the results.
Yeah, or hey, doc, I want my fasting insulin. I know you test my glucose, but I can't run that. So you can go online and order these tests yourself within the United States. We're very fortunate in that regard. I just use requestatest.com. You can buy the test. You can go to Quest. You can go to LabCorp, wherever you want. You get the data. I enter it into Heads Up Health. I track it myself. So, in terms of my particular markers for my own body, I definitely have the elevated homocysteine and the HSCRP and the numbers associated with folate and B12. So I keep a very close eye on those. I do like to run the full thyroid panel once a year, just to look at things like T3, T4, reverse T3. I like to do the lipids. Some of my other favorites are fasting insulin, fasting glucose, because as you know, sometimes your fasting glucose is normal, but that's just because the body's overcompensating with fasting insulin. So I like to look at those. Those are some of my favorite when I like to look at my own personal health. And then at home, some of the information I'm collecting is I'm a big fan of heart rate variability training. So I've got the Aura Ring, which really does a good job measuring my sleep quality, my HRV during the night, and it tells me how recovered and rested my body is. So I use that number pretty religiously as well. And then I do check my blood sugar. I think it's super important. As you know, sugar and high fructose corn syrup and refined carbohydrates, grains, they are a blood sugar nightmare. So that's definitely something I test regularly. And if there's restaurant foods and meals I'm not sure about, I'll do the postprandial test. And aside from that, I just like to step on the scale and keep an eye on my body composition. So those are my main numbers. That's how I personally manage my health. That's why I started my company, to give people the same tools. But those are my top, Guillermo. What are your top numbers that you like to track?
Testosterone, that's the only one you missed. Your hormone, complete hormone panel, just to make sure that any intervention that you do is helping you with that. A fasting cortisol level, morning AM cortisol it can give you a lot of information, especially if it's like first thing in the morning and it's low. Then you can think about doing a 24-hour cortisol test.
Saliva cortisol.
Yes, saliva cortisol. And then, try to figure out if you have some HPA axis dysfunction.
I had to go through that. I had the HPA axis dysfunction, so I've been there.
What's your TSH?
Yep. Normally it's about 1, right around 1. But on my most recent labs, it jumped up to about 1.7. And that's right around the time the MCV went up and the homocysteine went up, and I had not been taking any of my supplements for about a year.
Ah.
So exactly the ones you mentioned. And so the folate, the B12, I've just basically dialed those back in, actually with the help of Grace. Thank you, Grace, if you're listening. And I'm going to retest in a couple months.
Yeah, it's important because, it's like a three-legged stool, if your hypopituitary, your adrenals, they're not in sync, you start requesting more from your thyroid, or you start, requesting more from your adrenals or some more sex hormone, and then they get out of balance. So being able to get all those three things in balance is going to give you better health. So, super interesting conversation. Where can people find you? How can people get a hold of your blog? Where can they download your app?
Yeah, try us out. We're at headsuphealth.com. You can try it out for free for 30 days. You can link up Withings, Fitbit, Apple Health, glucometers, blood sugar, whatever is important to you. Set up your metrics, track your test results. So try it out for free, 30 days, headsuphealth.com. My email address is dave@headsuphealth.com. We've got our blog set up where we write a lot about how to interpret different lab tests. We really want to educate the individual on how to interpret this data, obviously working with professionals, but also helping people understand what these numbers mean, trying to demystify them. So there's a lot of information there. And we've got our own podcast going, and we'd love to have you on there in the near future,
Awesome.
Guillermo.
Yeah,
but
anytime.
Yeah, it's all based on headsuphealth.com. I think we could do probably a full show, Guillermo, on what we talked about related to the
homocysteine.
That whole family of numbers and how to interpret them, and then how to systematically approach it and figure out the step-by-step, just like you described. Test the B12, remeasure, test the folate, remeasure. I think it's a fascinating topic, and then people at home could actually go look at their own labs and start to say, okay, maybe I have some work to do here as well. So we could probably totally nerd out just on that one subject.
And don't get me started on iron.
All right, yes, we'll throw that in the mix as well.
It's a bear, man.
So that'll be awesome, is helping our listeners from your point of view help to understand these numbers. And then they can go into their patient portal and look at them and say, okay, wow, okay, that makes sense, or I see this pattern. That's what we're trying to facilitate here. So we can have that conversation on our show, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah. Any time, dude. You have my my Calendly, and you just book me.
That sounds awesome. It was a great discussion. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. And are you going to PaleoFX this year?
Absolutely. That's my favorite event of the year. We're hoping to have an exhibitor booth there, but it's always tons of fun. Are you going to be there?
Oh, yeah, of course. 100%.
All right. Well, we'll have a chance to meet and shake hands in person, so I'm looking forward to it.
And dance with Grace.
Of course, yes, with some Dry Farms wine.
Yeah, exactly. So nice to talk to you, man, and I can't wait to meet you at PaleoFX. So I'll talk to you
Sounds great.
soon.
Thanks, man. A lot of fun.